Right now, there are 114 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. It's history's highest. And why can I not say that? This is my own community.
These are your alphabets.
LGBTQI plus individuals are uniquely vulnerable due to state-sponsored homophobia and transphobia. And in over 60 countries around the world, queer and trans people face persecution and violence simply because of who they are or who they love. And joining us now is Latoya Nugent, head of engagement for Rainbow Railroad. Latoya, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. We really do appreciate you, shed light onto this conversation. For our listeners, can you just remind them of the mission of Rainbow Railroad?
Rainbow Railroad has been around since 2006, and what we do is that we help at-risk LGBTQI plus people globally who are experiencing persecution and violence because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics.
Yeah, so what are some of these forces that are behind the displacement of LGBTQI plus people from around the world? Like, why are we vulnerable? That seems kind of like a obvious question, but again, just to state for people, what are the driving forces behind these displacement?
At the top of the show, you mentioned that there are millions of people who've been forcibly displaced globally, right? Mm-hmm. And displacement generally occurs because of geopolitical crises, war, climate disasters, and so on. But for LGBTQI plus people, many of them are, in addition to being displaced by these geopolitical crises and climate disasters, they're also displaced because of homophobia and transphobia. And in many countries, such as the over 60 countries where LGBTQI plus people are criminalized, the homophobia and transphobia that they experience is state-sponsored. In addition to that, in some families, because of this state-sponsored homophobia, it creates a widespread discrimination across the society, and it feeds into family values. And many LGBTQI plus people, especially young people, experience homelessness because their own parents may make them homeless, put them out of their homes. Women who identify as queer are disproportionately affected by sexual violence. A lot of people, have to experience what's called conversion therapy. And there's a lot of community violence, community rejection, family rejection that LGBTQI plus people experience. And these are some of the drivers of displacement that the community experiences.
Latoya, I seem to detect a Jamaican accent. Are you from Jamaica by chance?
Yes. I'm originally from Jamaica, and I now live in Toronto, Canada.
Beautiful. I'm a big fan of Jamaica, but I know you mentioned so many countries. Are things changing at all in Jamaica for the better? I'd love to get back there, but my wife has said we're not going back there until things are better. I mean, is it slow to change, or are you seeing any improvements for us?
Jamaica is a very complex place. I tend to describe the country as two Jamaicas. So if you have the resources to live in a clandestine way and protect yourselves from the homophobic and transphobic attitudes of people in the society, there's a way that you can survive. But for many people, that's not the reality. We've also seen, in the past where it's a case of perhaps 2 steps forward and maybe 3 or 4 back, where you believe, I don't know if you remember, but I think it was in 2015, when I was back there, we organized the first Pride celebration, not like the Pride that you know in Chicago.
Right.
But we created space for the community to come together and to affirm their identities, and that has continued. But the primarily because of the evangelical movement in Jamaica and across the Caribbean more broadly, there is a hold that they have on many of our political leaders, and so it becomes very difficult for you to, one, effect any kind of legislative or policy change that is necessary for LGBTQI plus people to live freely and live with dignity. And it also makes it, doubly difficult for the cultural attitudes of people in society to change. And so to this day, in 2024, there are people whose lives are at risk. And even though you're seeing some movement in other parts of the Caribbean on the legislative front, there is no movement at all in Jamaica, as far as the rights of LGBTQI plus people are concerned.
They're stuck. Yeah, they're stuck there.
And,
I'm so sorry to hear that.
And thank you for the clarification about the severity of the situation. I know when people throw out homophobia or transphobia, at least here in the States and here in Chicago, people are like, oh, they're just using like a gay slur, or they're misgendering people, or whatever. But we're talking about actual physical threats to their lives in many places throughout the world, and truthfully in this country.
Yes.
But I'm glad that you expanded upon that, because those words, homophobia and transphobia, seem to be like, oh, well, just move through it. It's like, no, you can be imprisoned for 10 years.
Yeah.
You can be put to death. People will be attacked. Like it is a very serious life or death, literally, situation. What are some of the misconceptions and misinformation about refugees that we are getting?
I know that, like immigration generally is a hot topic in the U.S. right now, because it's an election year.
Yes, of course.
And sometimes, refugees feel like, we're used as a sort of political football. And the number one thing that I hear, in the debate about refugees is that they're a threat to the security of a country like the U.S., and that really just is not the case. If you think about it, people build their lives in their home countries, right? They have a family, they have friends, they have networks. Some people, they may be employed. And when somebody is forced to leave all of that, it's because they have no other choice. There's no alternative. And so what they're trying to do is to relocate to a city, to a state, to a country where they can recreate what it means to find home and to belong to community. And sometimes to create new families, so that they can live with dignity, so that they can live safely. They are escaping the violence and persecution of their home country so that they can live in places where they're able to live with the dignity that they deserve. They're not trying to disrupt or cause or create violence, in the new countries where they're relocating to. They're escaping violence and persecution and looking for somewhere else where they can live and thrive. And, it breaks my heart a lot because I am also a refugee. I had to flee Jamaica and I'm now living in Toronto. And it breaks my heart a lot when I hear people talk about refugees the way that they do. I know thousands of refugees, and I know the kinds of circumstances they had to flee in order, to be able to live and thrive. And they have been making significant contributions to their new communities, to their new societies. And so really, that's one of the things I want to address, in terms of misconceptions related to refugees.
It's been the backbone of our country from day one, is coming here for a better life. Coming here for a better, no matter how that looks. Yeah. And it's sad that people have turned it into such a campaign, issue.
Yeah. And,
it's really a campaign against humanity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to go back to your point about, it's just people who are trying to, they're leaving their home, trying to recreate their home in a new place. Now, and right now it's got to be really challenging, especially in the United States, with the increasing anti-LGBTQI plus legislation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the U.S., in our work, we realize that the U.S. is an interesting and complex place.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know if
you just said a mouthful, Latoya.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
We have these numbers that we track as an organization annually, and it's the number of requests for help that we get from LGBTQI plus people who are at risk in different countries in the world. And, last year, for example, we received a record number of requests for help, 15,352 to be exact. We also track the top 10 countries where we get requests for help from. Interestingly enough, last year, the U.S. was actually in that top 10. It was the number 3 country.
Wow.
And this is because of how complex the U.S. is. Because at the same time that the U.S. is in our top 10 list of countries where people are trying to flee, it is also one of the top countries where refugees would like to flee to. And what we're noticing is that because there are cities and states where people can affirm their identity and live with dignity and pride as LGBTQI plus people, for refugees overseas, they want to be able to live in those cities and states, even though there are other states where it's not entirely safe for LGBTQI plus people. So it's really a unique country. The other thing, too, is that we have this Communities of Care program where, in partnership with the U.S. government and other actors in the resettlement space, we are able to mobilize LGBTQI plus volunteers and allies of the community to support refugees after they relocate to the U.S. So it's almost as if that's an antidote to some of the anti-LGBTQ and anti-gender rhetoric, attitudes and legislation that we see in some states, while in other states we see the community galvanized, mobilized, and rallying around LGBTQI plus people when they relocate to the U.S.
Well, Latoya Nugent, thank you so much again for the work that you are doing and for putting a human heart and sentiment on this experience. For more information about how you can help out, go to rainbowrailroad.org. Latoya Nugent, thank you so much and for the work, and thank you for joining us today.
We appreciate you, Latoya. Thank you.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thank you.